I thought would be good would be just to give those who attended for the first time here a little bit of a summary of what the pilot is about. So let me just share a couple of slides on that. So the GM Digital Inclusion Social Housing pilot, the objectives of the pilot really were about, it's a discovery piece, and what we're looking to do is create a long-term sustainable solution to address digital inclusion social housing. 20% of Greater Manchester in social housing. We know that around 40% of people within Greater Manchester are digitally excluded in some way, and therefore we expect within social housing that might be up to 60%. So what we're looking to do is focus on social housing through this pilot project and look at what a sustainable solution might look like. Through the pandemic, we had lots of firefighting going on, which meant that once funding ran out for these interventions, then there's a kind of no longer term solution. So what we want to do is bring together social housing providers with local authorities and internet service providers to determine how we might make a sustainable model work. And so this is what this pilot is about. It's about discovering what works and what doesn't, and capturing the learning that Simon Yates is doing from his work at Liverpool University. And the intention is then to shape what an optimum model looks like for a large-scale GM-wide rollout, which includes things like standardising way leaves and maximising investment as well across competition. So those are the objectives of the social housing, the host social housing pilot, and we've got 5 social housing providers working with 5 different internet service providers. It's the largest pilot of its kind that we're aware of in Europe. We have 1,000 in each of those social housing pilots, working with the internet service provider, targeting different groups you see here and different property types. So where we are at the moment is that we've got all the pilot partnerships in place. We've got connectivity in place in each of the pilot areas. The research has been commissioned, and we're now at implementation. This is the bit where we actually look at what works and what doesn't. So we're at the kind of full model testing. And throughout this process, a continual shared learning between the social housing providers and the internet service, which is really important. And a lot of these learning has been captured through the research. The intention is that the pilots will be complete by the end of March this year in terms of the research capture. And then we're going to really look in earnest at what that rollout looks like. So I think we're at a really interesting stage in the development of the pilots. Some of the pilots are at different points, but the point is that in each of those pilots we have a really good relationship between the internet service provider and the social housing provider in terms of buying into the wider ambitions and buying into the kind of outcomes of it as well. So I'll stop there, and perhaps Simeon, if you can perhaps talk a little bit about where you are. Just actually, before you do, are there any questions at this stage? Nope, that's great. Okay, over to you, Sim.
Okay, I assume everyone can hear me. I'm going to share slides. Got to get the right ones because I've got multiple ones open here. Da, da, da. There we go, February. Okay, has everybody got, can everyone see that? Great. Now, a caveat I put in front of presenting some of this stuff to Andy Burnham and colleagues a week or so ago, before, ironically, Andy Burnham and colleagues lost all internet access in their building. is that, you know, some of the comments we're making and what we found, we are not criticizing people, and we're not saying, you know, whatever. We're just trying to reflect back what we're hearing and what we're finding. So this is a discovery piece, as John said. So some things will work and some things don't. Anything we say is not a criticism, because people have been working really hard on this. And also, to be blunt, I know from the conversations we've had with colleagues and with having been in various community locations doing focus groups and interviews and other things, that the reality on the ground at the moment with cost of living crisis and so on, for especially for social housing tenants, is intense, and that is people's focus, you know. So that all is just a starting point. But I think if we are going to learn about what works, we sometimes have to just reflect on what doesn't work, you know, and you know, sometimes it doesn't work with all the best intentions in the world. So just that caveat on the start of things. Today I'm going to do two things. I'm going to talk about some of the insights we've been getting from local government, speaking to local government colleagues. We haven't quite finished all of those interviews yet. We've got a couple more to go. So these are our thoughts so far from the information we've looked at. We've also been doing quite a lot of analysis of all of the various different types of interviews we've done so far, though the focus has been more on what social housing tenants need or what they've been saying. We're doing a little bit more reflection now on, you know, what my colleague, Belinda calls, you know, the service delivery, the support process, you know, the more local government side of things. So that's what I'm going to talk about first. But then every time we've had these conversations, some of the issues that were there in prior interviews have been coming out. And if I move on, also parallel to this, we've got another couple of big digital inclusion research projects going on. And in those, we've also been talking to local government, such as Welsh local government, as well as the Welsh government, you know, national government. And obviously, people keep providing us with examples of what they think is good practice in other areas. So I'm going to feed a bit of that in. But in all of those conversations, both these and in the ones, you know, in all of these different projects, some of the same themes keep coming through that have come up in the Manchester one. So a little bit of repetition at the end, but I think to push home some of the things that seem to be consistent, not just in Manchester, but everywhere else. So local government stuff. So thank you for colleagues who've already we've already interviewed and for your input. And that's been really, really helpful. Like I said, we've got a couple more, doing 2 more interviews to go on that. So what have we pulled out so far? It's interesting that it's quite varied, even within Manchester, across local government organisations, how they approach digital inclusion. I can't say I'm surprised, and I'm not meaning this is a criticism. Like I said earlier, it's an observation. We found it the same in Wales, and we found it historically in other parts of the country, and currently doing some work in Liverpool. It's the same there. So, and only some local authorities have a properly kind of mandated digital inclusion lead person. They often have a person leading digital inclusion, but it can often be as a part of some other role. So there's one of the things we would point out is that as digital inclusion cuts across so many different aspects of what local government delivers, you know, from health to educate, you know, from social care to education to housing to whatever, very often it kind of ends up being led by somebody out of one of those silos. Not always, you know. Leeds an example with a coordinated group. You know, Manchester has got a digital kind of board, etc. But a person whose job it is to do digital inclusion, really do it 100%, that's not always present in local authorities. That said, there is often someone who it is on their list. And as a couple of colleagues have said, it's on their list, but they're at a certain point in the organisation, and some of the issues are at a level above where they are in the organisation. So they kind of have to manage upwards to get things done down in some other silo. So there is a question there about where the interface point is in local authorities for digital inclusion. It has kept popping up adult education, and that's not just in Manchester, but in Wales as well, as an area that the person or the people with a digital inclusion focus come from, because it often comes out of the skills agenda, or social housing, you know, because again, that's the point where all these issues concentrate, but that, as I'll say in a minute, depends on relationship to social housing. In other places, it can be health and well-being, you know, or some community in other parts of the country we've seen, and so on. So that's an interesting thing maybe for local authorities to reflect on, is if we're engaging in doing digital inclusion, they've got a role here. You know, is there a coordination role? Is there somebody who's looking across the full portfolio of issues? We've said this, the social housing people have said this, the charities we talked to have said this, some of the people who've experienced support on the ground have said this. Resourcing of digital inclusion is patchy, it's cyclical, it's not constant. And in local authorities, it seems to have been drawn out of the budgets for, or put into the budgets for where it's sort of being led from. And it's not its own distinct budget. So that's just some reflections on kind of roles and resourcing. And I have to say, having spoken to quite a few colleagues now in these kind of roles, just hats off to the amount of amazing work people have been doing, innovative stuff, and just the hard work and the battling across portfolios to get things to happen. I mean, that has been really, really clear. The other thing that's come up is, and this is more of our interpretation of what's been said rather than what people said sort of like directly as a statement, it's where and how to intervene. And then I was just saying to John, I was talking to Liverpool City Region this morning, having very much that conversation. You know, do you do a specific intervention around providing training or providing equipment or providing some kind of infrastructure? Or do you try and do everything? I mean, or do you try and break it down into what each different community needs, and how do you build it up from that? You know, other people we've spoken to, other social housing groups, have gone more that way than an individual big hit kind of thing. And this, the social housing pilot is more of the big hit, provide access infrastructure end of that debate. And I would say from the conversations, the first port of call reflects where it's owned. If it's owned in adult ed, training might be the first thing that's called on, though there are examples of where infrastructure is the first thing they've gone for because they know the importance of getting access. Systematic engagement across local government. Cost of living crisis, this has gone from, under COVID, getting itself to the top of the agenda. Let's get everybody online so they've got services. Oh my God, kids can't get education, you know, people can't get their healthcare. To cost of living crisis, it's back down, you know, like Andy Burnham said, it's number 4 or 5 on the list, and everyone knows it's important. But it pops up when things go wrong, and that's come out of the conversations. You know, it raises its head at a crisis point where, you know, an individual or a community or a group is facing an issue that's to do with that's not really about digital. It might be about access to education, but part of the solution is to make sure that they're online so they can get things. That's come out of the conversations. So, for instance, I mean, Leeds is a well-documented case. They're very open and they're very vocal about the really good work they've done there, you know, and they have a team across the council. We've had Oxford presented to us as a case study, so we are probably going to go and try and chase Oxford about having put digital inclusion across all strategy activities in the local government. So that's all from other local governments telling us to talk to Oxford. We've yet to speak to Oxford. If Oxford's on the call, speak to us. We'd like to understand if that's the case and how that's the case. And also different intervention things. Some of the local councils are much closer to, say, social housing, so that's a route for intervention. Others have got close working relationships with third sector partners for delivering digital inclusion. Again, not often across all aspects of what the local infrastructure is. So that's something else that's come out. And like I said, funding, back round again, different budgets are being used for addressing this, and there often isn't a separate budget just for digital inclusion. Again, that was the case in Wales and in some other regions we've talked to. And then levers. Depending on how the local government is set up, whether, say, social housing is in-house or arm's length, whether they've got some substantial technical infrastructure that they can use or not, etc. In the context of Greater Manchester, of course, what devolved powers Greater Manchester's got in the context of Wales, what devolved power Wales as a national government has got, these all set boundaries on what interventions are fundable or doable. And I think one of the issues here is it's quite a complicated space for local government to work in and see across the opportunities. And I think that's where a little bit more, I would suggest, talking between local governments and the lead people in local governments on this, on what's working and what's not working for them, and what they can and can't do might be really useful, you know, to get understanding what those policy levers are for different groups. Again, I'm not saying this in any way as kind of a criticism. It's just an observation that, you know, not every local government's in exactly the same place in terms of resources, ability to do policy, funding, etc. But also physically, you know, some are more rural, some are more urban, some have got greater need, some have got lesser need, etc. as a, you know, proportion in terms of their population. So they're all in a slightly different place. So, you know, and so on. And very often, like I said, it cuts across other policy priorities, which are, you know, big on people's lists, and how you coordinate across those, as you know, came up in the conversations. So those are our kind of general observations of what we've seen across the local government organisations we've spoken to so far. Like I said, we've got a couple more to go, and ones we've spoken to historically. I think in that triangle we've got of local government, internet service providers and social housing, I think there is a question to ask about what role local government in that, as the practical delivery is at the social housing level, and they are, in some respects, what role local government in coordinating with them. And I think one of the things that's missing is thinking about training and education and those other agendas like health or whatever, which aren't necessarily owned by the social housing provider, but they deal with it too. So there's something in there, and we'll dig it out more. But I think it's worth there being a future conversation about those, that you know, the three legs of the stool here in terms of the partners and how they balance and so on. So before I move on to rattling on about stuff that I've partially said before, has anyone got any questions on that? I mean, some of this may be really obvious to the local authority people around the room, and you might all go, yeah, that's exactly whatever, or not. But it's been good to just see that it's not different. You know, there are differences, but the issues, you know, fit across different areas.
All I was going to say, Sim, on that is that I think when we embarked on this, we kind of recognised that in many cases, digital inclusion fell between stools, that it was a challenge that kind of nobody owned, and and certainly that seemed to be the case with our government engagement as well at the higher level. And of course, there's an element of that being replicated at local level too. Invariable, you know, it varied between local authorities. But I think the other thing that we found through the conversations that we've had is that some local authorities find it difficult to get higher level ownership,
Right.
you know, it's kind of strategic level of the issue. I think it's changing now, but I think that's one of the things.
I mean, I'd say that's not an issue just for local government. We find it lots, you know. I may have said this before, in work we did on the arts sector, I can tell you from personal experience in universities, they're getting the very senior teams to buy into issues of digital, not physical infrastructure like how we got the kit and the computers, but the broad implications of digital and support and skills and best, you know, effective use of spend to deliver on services and skills through digital, that is hard actually to get the right people at a senior level to focus on that, you know, and it not be pushed down to either the technical department or the education department, but for it to sit at a higher level. That's true across lots of public sector and private organisations.
Yeah, Bina, do you want to come in?
I just had a question more for everyone on this call, really, just in the spirit of sharing. Sorry, I'm in the office if there's some background noise. In the spirit of sharing, is there anyone on the call that has made some waves in terms of those particular policy areas who can share some of their thoughts around good practice?
I think, Sarah, you made a comment in the chat. I don't know whether you want to come in.
Hi everyone. Yeah, it's Sarah Marsh here from Connecting Cambridgeshire. We've realised, and it really reflects what Simeon's been saying, we've realised that there's no coordinated approach in our area across Cambridgeshire and Peterborough to digital inclusion. I come from the Connecting Cambridgeshire programme. We have been traditionally all about the infrastructure, and we've started working with our adult services colleagues as well on digital skills, but we realised that there's no real leadership anywhere to coordinate all the activities, and also no real research into what's the current local state of digital exclusion in our area. So that's why we've managed to get some combined authority funding for a digital inclusion lead. So this is really timely and really helpful. So thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks for that point. Is there anybody else who's got any comments from local authorities' perspective? Okay, I think you're on to part two then, Sim.
Okay, so some of this is a little bit repetition, but not everybody on the call will have seen all this before. And I felt it was very much repetition, and I realised, of course, that's because I did the presentation to the other group, to Andy Burnham's group, between the last of these and this one. So some general themes and recap on what we found, because like I said, even when we've been talking to local government people over the last couple of weeks, these have been popping up again in conversation. So they're definitely there. In our other work with the Welsh Government, they've really come to the fore. In our other work on minimum digital living standards, they've come to the fore. And they're all really pertinent to what we're trying to do with the social housing pilot. So I thought it best to go over them again, because I think we need to really start thinking about what they mean for interventions. Social housing providers. I think, and this is also true for local government providers, of course, the pilot is not their first foray into trying to address digital inclusion, right? Nor is it the only one they've got on their books at the moment. And I think that's important, that actually, you know, because of the kind of churn of funding and the different goals of the people who are funding, whether it be education or inclusion or skills for regeneration or whatever it might be, there's a lot of effort and time going in by all of these people, whether they're social housing or local government, to get hold of the money to deliver something and then keep going and keep doing. Yeah. So just to say, I think, and I'm going to say this, quite a few colleagues on the interviews, whether they're from local government or social housing providers, have said, oh, well, we're not experts in this area. And we've sat there on the call thinking, you're doing some amazing stuff. You are experts in this. You know this stuff, right? You really do. And you're just tackling it at a local level. But there is a lot of churn. And then there is also, unfortunately, some of these projects finish, people move on, institution memory's lost, and then they happen again. So I do think there's something in there that's important about capturing the knowledge of all of the things that people doing inside and outside the pilots here and elsewhere. But it goes back to that, having some institutional lead, because somebody somewhere can then, you know, keep hold of that institutional knowledge. And second, it's not just about the digital skills keep coming up. It's about physical infrastructure, about what you do in different types of social housing You know, what's the best solution for that physical space, what the community needs and wants, you know, etc. Those things just keep coming through in everything everybody says, and you can't park them, because I think that localness is really important to making things work. So that has kept coming through. But going back to my starting point, at the moment, running a pilot on this at the moment is a challenge, because the frontline realities for many organizations are quite stark. And how we have that, and I think, you know, Andy Burnham said this last time, how we have the conversation about the fact that we can't drop this as a topic, even though the pressing need might be food banks or warm hubs or whatever, because if you don't have this, then those other things are also compounded and worsened. And it does often sound like a nice to have, and it gets pushed down the list when actually it's a need to have for lots of people as well. So that's kept coming through, that we've got to walk that line between the frontline realities that especially people we're working with are dealing with. This just doesn't go away, and I've said this now about 3 times, but I think I have to say it again. Social tariffs are not landing in the people we're talking to, and the local authority people are saying they're not landing. The social housing people have said they were not landing. In the focus groups and some of the research survey data, people are saying they're not landing, and in the Ofcom national data, it's there. And part of it is cost. A colleague was telling us about, you know, their area, and in the kind of I think it was 4 or 5 areas of most need, households had less than £30 or less of disposable income at the end of a month. That's not taking into account having access to like broadband as part of the package of things they've paid for before you get to disposable income. You know, it in our minimum digital living standards stuff, which includes families from all different economic backgrounds, they've all agreed a consensus for broadband digital access that, you know, we would cost up at about a £25 a month package, plus mobile pushing £30 a month. So you're talking getting people to a level of digital access that's okay would consume all of their disposable income, you know. So that, I mean, the sweet spot is somewhere between £5 and £10. The caveat is that this is more anecdotal, but the comment has been, if that's just 10 megabit broadband or 20 megabit broadband and nothing else, not telly, not some other bit of package, I can't really warrant spending it, even if it's at a price I can afford, because I could do something else with my time. Got the swimming pool, you know, whatever. So I do think social tariffs are important, you know, we must have them in some manner, but they're currently not landing. And I think it's to do with the cost, the practicalities of contract changes being tied in for long term. A lot of conversation this morning in Liverpool about people wanting a pay-as-you-go version of broadband, you know, where once if they've got enough money this month, they turn it off and then they could turn it on again. I don't know about the practicalities of that for our ISP colleagues, but when you're dealing with that kind of number at month end, then that's a challenge. So that's not going away, that discussion. And this more has come from our other project work, but broadband and mobile don't disconnect from each other, and we could see that in some of our focus groups, that mobile only is great for keeping people online, but it is the last line of defense. You know, it's, yes, a good amount of, and, you know, thank God we've got the data bank and all of those things that are going on to keep people online. But in the end, it is kind of the last line of defense. Having broadband at home is really important, especially for communities where when you leave the home, your mobile might be, and your mobile data allowance might be an issue. So things like people on very low tariffs for mobile with low levels of data and having to manage when to turn it on and off in an urban setting, or people in a rural setting where they've got maybe good mobile connection in the village, but when they drive to football or when they go on the bus to somewhere else, they lose that. So you need the two in combination is coming really out as the thing that makes people truly connected, is having the access to both. And then that has really come out over the last 6 months in everything we've done. So again, that relates to, you know, the pilots. We've got some that are mobile only solutions, some that are broadband solutions. And if we're having, you know, if there are questions about whether they're working or not, or how they fit with people's lives, I think it's because those two they're not either ors. They're a package, as it were, and so on. Yeah, and I think if this is probably going to sound like a criticism, but skills feels like it's a secondary issue in the pilots. And I know there's different things that different ISPs are doing to support skills, etc. But I do think if you don't have the skills package alongside the access package, there's a challenge there, you know, and a couple of colleagues have talked about the importance of the skills and support being not classroom, being at elbow, more individual and available when people need it. So you give people access, then they can rock up somewhere the next day, said, well, you've given me some data, or I've got Wi-Fi at home now. I've had this laptop sat there that my daughter bought me, you know, 2 years ago. How do I use it? That gets people online. Saying come to a computer class on a Saturday morning doesn't. So there's something in there about how we look at the skills package in these interventions. And the other is cliff edges. It's true for the intervention pilots, but it's true for lots of other intervention pilots. People get data or Wi-Fi for 6 months or a year or whatever with some skills package, and then it drops off a cliff. And as somebody said, we've got people who you train them up one month, 3 months later, their data packages run out, then they get some more data and they're back in asking the same basic stuff on how to use things, because that consistency of access is important, and skill support. So I'm not sure where that is in the pilots, but it's definitely coming out of the data that we've been looking at. And just to say, I'm going to wave a flag for our minimum digital living standards project. We do seem to have found 3 real key areas of need that family have identified that have to somehow blend together. One is the access and basic equipment. The other is functional skills using the kit. And the third one is skills that allow them to feel safe and confident. And they've all really basically said, if you've got a gap in 1 or 2 of these, or that's when people struggle. And that's come from the families themselves, not from ourselves kind of looking from the outside, which you might have come to that conclusion looking from the outside, but to hear it articulated clearly by, you know, different families talking about the minimum needs for their household, it's really important. And I say again, not a criticism but an observation, we've probably hit the access and basic equipment stuff and maybe some of the functional skills stuff in some of the pilots, but I'm not sure whether we've got the safety and confidence bit in the package. So takeaways, again, local partnership is just absolutely important. And you know, that link between local government, social housing, ISPs, I think we need to, you know, to see about how you can, what works better there, etc. Skills feel like they've become a bit of a Cinderella issue, and so on. Social housing providers are on the front line of this, and it cuts across other things and for local government. Landlords in general, beyond social housing, what role for them is a question that's come up. But the longer term partnership or longer term funding is really important to, you know, that's what everybody keeps worrying about. And lastly, as John raised, at the moment there is a bit of a gap in national debate on this English central government stroke UK central government, not in Wales, not in Scotland, not in Greater Manchester, not in Birmingham, not in Liverpool now, you know, etc., but as kind of regional authorities, but definitely central government. There we go. That's me finished. That's okay. Can I
Brilliant.
stop sharing? Do I stop sharing?
Thank you very much, Sim. A great deal of food for thought there. And as you can see from kind of takeaways, as we've reached the end of the pilot project, we're starting to crystallise some of these kind of findings. And it's fantastic that you happen to be working on the minimum digital standard at the same time, Sim. So it's great to be able to draw on that experience too. I just wonder whether anybody's got any questions at this stage particularly about this issue of skills. I noticed that Vicky, you've mentioned in the chat around that issue. Is there anything you want to talk about there, or Tanya? Perhaps Tanya first.
Hi, yeah, thanks, John. I was just going to reiterate what Sim said, that one of the key findings that we've had from our involvement in the pilot is that there isn't a black and white split between people who are online and people who are not online. It's much more complicated than that. And we've really found that from the analysis that Sim's done for us, that actually even those who describe themselves as using the internet, the amount of skills that they have and what they're using the internet for and the demographics of those people actually is quite limited. So, for example, we find that people who are online, those who are making least use of the internet are the same ones who aren't using it at all. So if you're older, if you have a disability, and if you're in certain geographical postcodes within Stockport, where obviously we work, you are only using it in a really limited way, which really presents a lot of barriers, almost as many barriers as the ones who aren't using it at all, in terms of, for employment or for applying for things like schools or blue badges or whatever it might be. The sort of practical application of it is really missing from a lot of people who do describe themselves as internet users. And that's a massive challenge for us, because even though we did quite a lot of drilling down within the survey that we did of some of our residents, we realised that actually we need to be far more targeted in the approach that we're taking to meeting their needs, because it isn't just a matter of putting on a skills class in a community centre and everybody will be fine, because a lot of people won't go to it, and even those who do go to it might think they've got skills, and actually from our purposes as professionals looking in at what they might need to do or what they might be missing out on, they are really limited users. So that's been quite an eye-opener for us, that it really is quite a complex picture, and we need to put a number of different strategies in place as a business to be able to try and meet those needs and accept that some of them are never going to use the internet, and we have to provide our services in a way that acknowledges that, rather than trying to push everybody online and assume that that's going to be the position that we end up at, because I don't think we ever will.
Thanks, Tanya. I think a lot, there is a lot of complexity about this issue, and I think when we started out on this this journey with these pilots, there's a great deal of focus around social tariffs. Can we get social tariff? Can we get take up of social tariffs? And the work that Sim's been doing has kind of rightly identified that fundamentally it's far more complicated than that. And I think the starkness of the impact of the cost of living crisis as well, causing people to make decisions around whether they continue to take digital connectivity is also pretty worrying. And this this sweet spot of £10 per month as well is also interesting. One of the things that we're looking at is the potential to align VAT with other infrastructure providers, but even that doesn't actually get to that point of £10 a month. So that's interesting. I think as we kind of work through this and the findings come to the fore, we can start to think about what alternatives might be. So Jodie, do you want to come in?
Yeah, it was just a quick one really, Simeon. Off the back of the longer term goals of the project, we've talked about, or rather you've talked about, and we've listened to you talk about, how important it is to do this from a solution point of view at a very local level, which is where we are at with social housing providers and those local authorities that are in-house housing providers. And that skills is something, again, that's local delivery, where you've got the two different situations where you've got a local authority that can have a joined up approach because they manage their solution in-house, and you've got social housing providers that are very reliant then on local authority skills provision. But again, where you'd look at things like this memory loss as a project comes to an end at a local authority level, is there I guess a goal from the project to try and raise this to government at a national level to see if you can then drive that, I guess, importance by putting digital inclusion and the delivery of projects like this across the country or across the nation, by having that elevated at national government level as a post or as a priority, that you can then try and drive some of that knowledge up through to and then disseminate it that way.
Yeah, that's a really good
Can
point.
I jump in, but then pass it back to you and to yourself, John and Bina, on this one? So as a researcher and as somebody who's been engaged in this kind of area for a long time, and I've had a role, and I still have roles in terms of trying to get stuff into policy and government, hence working with the Welsh Government and historically other regions, my answer is absolutely yes, we need to keep pushing. And I think the more we do that in a coordinated manner between like this project and other ones, so much the better. You know, I'm a formal expert advisor to DCMS. The other week I raised it with the Chief Scientific Officer for DCMS saying this has fallen off the radar, what's going on, kind of thing, etc. Now I know why on a practical level, but I do think there's a real need to push that. There are other organizations that are obviously pushing this, Good Things Foundation, Digital Poverty Alliance, you know, and so on, plus regional governments. I think, you know, there's a real need to try and push this back up the agenda. And I'm hoping I'm amongst friends, but given the current circumstances of governance in the UK, it is a challenge to get policy stuff engaged with, I would say. You know, we're in an odd place with a looming election and, you know, other challenges to British governance.
Thanks, Sam. I think that's right. In terms of us being certainly in an odd place at the moment, but we're also in a place where manifestos are starting to be written as well, and there's the opportunity to start to influence those. So these kind of evidence bases with these good discovery pieces, with the kind of weight of the, you know, if you like, the lobbying from not only from local authorities but also from internet service providers about the importance of this, is going to be really important. It's almost a bit of a pincer movement, I think, between all of us about how we approach our various people of influence across government and other organisations too. It's a process, part of the process, and I think as we get to the end of this programme, we'll be looking at, well, what are the routes by which we can make sure that message gets across. Learning, of course, from the impact in Scotland and Wales, which have had some elements of funding and support for that. Bina?
I think Vicky was had a hand up first, John.
Yeah, sorry, Vicky.
Don't worry, you're well mannered as ever, Bina. Thank you. It's just coming back to training, and I think we need to think around how adult education money is commissioned, and training is available. And I noticed somebody earlier in the chat had put about essential digital skills being available to everybody, but those opportunities that are funded through that adult education budget have got to be, if you like, shoehorned into achieving a qualification. And for lots of people who want to simply be connected for reasons other than to do a spreadsheet or send an email, that training isn't available because it doesn't fit into a qualification, so therefore cannot be funded. So the way we commission learning and training, perhaps certainly as a devolved authority here in Manchester, it'd be great to think that there was some there was less restriction around that. So actually we could be funded to deliver these one-to-one sessions and very much hand holding. There's a massive gap, massive.
Okay, yeah, that's a really good point, and I think we pick up on that. Bina, is there anything you want to say in relation to that as well?
Not necessarily in relation to that, although we are constantly trying to make those links into other policy areas, and I think the evidence base and yourselves really help to make that case. Just in terms of bringing this to the attention of government, I suppose so there's lots that is going on in terms of government, or trying to get this on the radar of government. But it's not always best served coming from us as a combined authority. And that's where we're working with other partners in terms of bringing that to MPs' attention. But there is work being done around this. So Digital Poverty Alliance, Simulates, we've got a Good Things Foundation, a bit of a coalition voice, but also working with industry around this. So the social housing pilot, we've got John Duncan on the call from Virgin Media. We are inviting MPs to come and see the pilots, visit the pilots, and also then take it back with a challenge to make sure that this evidence, we have an evidence led approach around government engagement. John, did you want to come in at all on that?
No, I'm fine with that, Bina. That was a very clear point. Like you say, we've already had sessions where we've got we had the local MP in Wythenshawe come to the session where we were talking, and Sarah was there actually about what is being delivered as part of the project. So it was really powerful. And I say the question is going to go to government about this, and we've been helping steer a question on what that's going to be. So the voice that we're getting from this project is really significant, and a lot, there may be findings that we're coming out with which are challenging. But that's not a problem really, because we can still sort of share those challenges and look at ways we can look to address them together. So I think we've got industry representatives here who are also channeling this up into their organisations. Say Alex, I'm sure you'd be speaking about this from the hyperoptic perspective. There's definitely ways and means which we are going to address this together and look to sort it out. So keep it going, keep the faith.
Thanks, John. I'd like to move on to the work that Bolton at Home are doing with hyperoptic shortly, but Margaret, you've got your hand up.
Hi, yes, it was only actually to follow up on what Tanya was saying, in that the funding that we have, which has come from the combined authority, is actually just for actually progressing people and starting at a very low level. We don't do online courses, so they're fully supported with a tutor and a mentor, with 60% of it being done face-to-face. So it really is about supporting people in social housing. We've done something very similar in the West Midlands area, and what was actually found was that the social housing company had got, I think it was Virgin at the time, to donate some SIMs, and they caused more problems than they solved, because they found that the people, many of whom were vulnerable in houses of multiple occupation, actually were getting scammed, and the managers couldn't help them. So we actually went in and upskilled the managers in cybersecurity, but also did essential digital skills, both accredited and non-accredited, with service users, so that they actually could use services and be protected.
Yeah, I think that's important, Margaret, about what we do being coordinated, and because the issue is so much more complex than just equipment.
Indeed.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you very much for this conversation. It's really good conversation. What I'd like to do now is to move on to a particular example of a pilot project that where Bolton at Home are working directly with hyperoptic, and I think this is a bit of a double act, isn't it, Shauna and Alex? So you've got, I think, a PowerPoint presentation to share. You don't need. Do you need me to drive, or you're all right?
No, we'll drive. I think in the spirit of the pilot itself, it's very much been a duet. So happy to continue that, John. So I'll share my screen. And I'll just go into present mode. And is that showing up the first slide? Excellent, excellent. So Shauna, I'll let you take the floor.
Okay, thanks very much. Hi, everybody. I'm Shauna Morton. I'm head of the community engagement with Bolton at Home, and I'm pretty new to this party. I think something that Simeon said earlier reminded me the thing about lost memory or institutional knowledge being lost. There was a lead for this area before, and he left, went off to plant trees, and so we had a gap for a while, and then now I've been drafted into it. So, and it's been wonderful to be part of this, actually. It's been a really nice experience. So Bolton at Home, we've got 18,000 properties in Bolton. We've got maybe another 1,500 outside of Bolton. We've known for a while that digital exclusion has been a real issue for our customers. We also know that sometimes that digital exclusion can happen periodically. And a lot of times it depends on not so much having the kit, but having the money to actually pay for access. So we were looking for a solution, and I think we started talking to Hyperoptic a few years ago, but then the pandemic hit, and then we different priorities. And I think, again, a lot of the stuff Simeon said resounded with me in terms of things get pushed down, always pushed down in terms of what's important at any one time for a housing association. And right now it might be damp and condensation. That's a really big priority for us, on top of the cost of living. So sometimes it's difficult to keep a focus on things. So it did get pushed away, but we're back on with it now, and I've had the pleasure of working with Alex on quite a few things, and we decided that we wanted to present this as a joint project. It's not Bolton at Home, so it's not Hyperoptic, it's something that we've come together to do together. And so if we go into the first slide, Alex, seeing as you're driving. So the Hyperoptic came to us, and they'd already developed this very staged approach, which was really good for us because, again, a lot of the stuff you're saying, Simeon, resounds with me, is that we didn't have that one expert that knew exactly how we would approach this and everything else. So this was brilliant. So, and it went actually extremely well. They came in and they engaged with all the key stakeholders within Bolton at Home. Now that includes even our surveyors and people like that, so that as many people across Bolton at Home that needed to at the very beginning knew what was going to happen. They assigned a dedicated project management team who worked really closely with Bolton at Home staff to look at the best level of connectivity for the partner. They agreed they would provide broadband capability for just under 1,000 households. And we also looked at all these households would be places where we have blocks of apartments or flats or whatever you want to call them. The apartments that we actually targeted are 2, 3 and 1 bed. So we got a really nice demographic of people that's pretty much represented the majority of Bolton at Home tenants. And we sent out joint communication from Bolton at Home and from Hyperoptic. By the way, I do talk fast, so if you've missed anything, Alex will talk slower on the next slide, and he'll be able to clarify anything if I've spoke too fast. Right, so we sent out this joint communication that came from both of us, and we made sure our contact centre was aware of this, because very often if something comes out, we do get a lot of tenants who will phone up and query, thinking it's some kind of scam or somebody's put our logo on something and sent it out. So we made sure so that we were there to make sure that people were reassured that this was a genuine offer. Next slide.
Thanks,
Is that you, Alex?
It is. I was just going to say, just to add to that, I think the importance from our side was really to lay out to all the different stakeholders across Bolton at Home the sort of importance of this and the scope that this had as well across Manchester and Greater Manchester, and that really helped embed the idea of and the spirit of the pilot as well. So, it's sort of a note to take there is that, if you get involved and engaged the different stakeholders, they see the tangible outcome and the effect that this could have on the residents. It really helps them to drive this forward. So just a little add on from me there. I think, Shauna, you're up next on the next slide.
Okay, so a key part of doing this, of course, is that we actually engaged with our residents beforehand, before going out and doing all this. And that's really because I think everybody in social housing and maybe across the board knows how key it is that we have our customers on board and influence in what it is that we do, especially when it's something that's going to impact them. So we consulted, we have the resident voice channel, which is really tenants who've volunteered to come together and to be asked about things that we're going to be doing. So we had over 100 of those respond, and when we sent out, this is the idea, this is what we're doing, this is the pilot, if you like. And we got a really nice, overwhelming, positive response from our voices in terms of all the communications that were going out. Would people be able to understand them, those types of things, and in terms of actually doing something about digital exclusion in our communities as well. And next slide.
Thank you, Shauna. So I think I'll take the baton over. So from Hyperoptic's point of view, we wanted to tap into this sort of community, and the voices really allowed us to do that. So alongside one of our audience managers who looks at sort of our customer base and how to sort of suit their best needs, we set up a sort of a digital roundtable. So I'll come on to that shortly. But I think what we wanted to set from the outset was, let's understand Bolton & Home's current digital ambitions. How can we work with both the digital team and the residents to solve that? And then both, collaboratively build a plan and provide residents with a value for money offer. So with that engagement with the residents, we wanted to really channel that sort of collaboration. And the objective really was to understand, okay, more about digital behaviours and receptions with Bolton & Home residents, and then look at enabling initiative and proposition development tailored to local needs. So in order to do that, and in order to get some of the attention, I guess, of the residents to give up their time, we did offer £20 love to shop vouchers, which did the trick. It enticed people to go, actually, this is the reason here to sort of give up my time, and I can benefit from it from a voucher as well. So that really helped. So note to self to all sort of ISPs and also all social housing providers that that really did help bring a lot of people to the forum to speak, which is always good. So the overall feedback summary, and I know Shauna will go into more details of this later on, but really sort of high level was around price reviews and speed. So that's a given, as we all know. Overall value for money, so linking into sort of social tariffs and what can be done there. Also access to digital devices. So the usual there with, okay, is there accessibility to device loan scheme? Can I go to the library and access, devices there as well? And then the financial burden, so that sort of fight between fixed and mobile, which I know Simeon mentioned before, is from our perspective, and I think what's been echoed at the beginning of this chat, is the fixed broadband is something that is necessary. The mobile connectivity cannot suffice to complete the sort of digital needs, day-to-day needs of your residents at the moment. But I think it's also key that mobile does have a big part to play in this, and that actually there is a choice between, well, with residents when making a sort of financial choice there is between, do I keep my mobile switched on over broadband, essentially. So there's something to look at there. So in terms of our offer, and it's sort of in the spirit of the pilot, is that we have a standard social tariff. I won't go too much into it, but with Hyperoptic social tariff, we remove barriers. So for instance, we don't do contracts. There's no exit fees or install fees. And it's really inclusive for those residents. We try to remove as many barriers as possible, including credit checking as well. Now, what we wanted to do is we wanted to go a little bit further. So I had a real sort of special position in the company to actually, with the spirit of the pilot, to go away and actually do something a little bit differently. So coupled with our existing social tariff and fair fibre, what we wanted to offer off the back of the Voices meeting in committee was looking at, okay, vouchers. and vouchers that were more affordable. So it basically essentially allowed residents to gain a 50 meg full fibre connection at £5 per month. So when we talked earlier about the sort of the sweet spot between £5 and £10, this brought this right down. But the connection level of bandwidth was still high enough, because I think from our point of view, that's really important. You shouldn't have a social tariff which is below, we recommend 50 meg, because it just doesn't carry out those needs and support the needs of the residents. If you've got multiple devices, children in the house, anything below 50 meg just does not suffice. So we didn't want to drop that down. So we kept that the same. And we started off with Bolton to deliver 10% of what we delivered. So 100 vouchers of these vouchers were made available. Now, what's really interesting and something that I'm happy to share further with Simeon is that we have tried something similar to this from Hyperoptic's point of vision in the past, where we've actually provided free connectivity for 12 months. And the take up of that was really, really low. So this paid voucher actually gave us the ability to sort of understand how the market and how the residents perceive. And I think from our own findings is that a free service sometimes is seen as it's not credible, especially just coming through as a letter drop from an ISP to say, oh, there's a free service here. People have got, sort of worries around it being a scam. People think it's too good to be true. So I was really interested, and the company was really interested to understand, okay, what would a paid but heavily reduced voucher scheme look like? And I'm happy to share some of the stats. So in terms of Hyperoptic take-up, we had 56% took the voucher scheme. So the vouchers were made ready and available by a code that the resident could just ring up Hyperoptic and obtain that sort of monthly price for 12 months. And it was used at Bolton at Home's discretion, so it wasn't sort of specified for any sort of specific individual at Bolton at Home. It was anyone who was able to take up Hyperoptic at the time. So I think if you look there, like I said before, is 50 meg, that sort of £5 per month voucher, 56% of residents took that up. And that is a huge comparison in terms of what our social tariff take up is across the board. It is super low, as Simeon referred to before. So already this has shown us that there is an appetite for a product, an affordable product, and a product which is sort of high level in its bandwidth as well. What was also interesting is you can see 16% of people took a gig, which is our top end product. So still across the board, there's still an appetite there for in social housing for a high bandwidth product, which I think is very interesting as well. I want to just sort of open the floor to a couple of questions. Has anyone got sort of questions on that voucher sort of scheme at all initially? Happy to sort of take things afterwards, but just wanted to put it out there.
Jody?
Yeah, it was just a really quick one, Alex. Where it's the 56% take up, is that purely 56% driven by that 10% of delivered units available as the voucher, or is that 56% of the take up was at 50 meg and a portion of that 56% was voucher driven?
No, it was all voucher driven. So that 56% represents
Okay,
the 50
cool.
meg, which is voucher driven. Yeah. So real good success from our point of view. And I think just to add is that what helped us was a joint communication. I think I didn't really touch on this too much before, but we sent out a letter in conjunction with Bolton at Home. So the letterhead was from Hyperoptic and Bolton at Home. Probably you've seen the two logos on the slides previously. And that I believe from what I've seen in previous sort of engagements is that that's really helped drive that trust from the resident. And I definitely think Sean is going to go away and understand and maybe carry out some additional surveys with those residents that those letters were sent out to and understand what their feedback was to that particular letterhead as well. But yeah, thanks for your comments.
Okay, I know that John and Tanya want to come in, but I noticed that Simeon's got his hand up, and I'd quite like to give him, bring him in and give them the findings.
Got a couple of quick questions then, a practical one. So that 56% of there is 56% of people. Can I just go over this again with you? That's 56% of the people you offered vouchers to took up the took up the voucher and got a 50 meg service, and the others just paid for it and got the other services? Or is that 56% of all the people that got any kind of hyper optic service? Because you've only got 100 users, so that would imply that there's 56 people took the voucher and got 50 meg, but the rest of the people who got a letter decided to pay for it themselves.
So that's correct. So obviously with market sharing and such, I had to do the percentages, but you've done the math pretty solidly there. So in terms of that, that's overall penetration. So hyper uptake, that's overall penetration. For reasons why people took the 150, 500 meg 1 gig was obviously they wanted to take a higher bandwidth at that time. So they just saw that they wanted to take a higher bandwidth over.
So they didn't get a voucher then.
So they did get the chance to have a voucher. So the voucher is issued as a code. So it was up to the resident to ring up Hyperoptic and either pick, if they wanted to choose the 50 meg, they were able to then give the code to obtain that £5 per month price.
Right, okay. My next question is, how did you decide 50? I agree with it, but how did you come to 50 meg? What was your reasoning why 50 meg is a good, not a minimum?
It's a pretty simple question. It's our minimum bandwidth that we offer here at Hyperoptic, so we don't offer anything less. So we offer 50 meg, 150 meg, 500 meg, and a gig.
And are you cable only?
So we're full fiber provider.
Right. Okay. Right. Okay. Because that's one interesting thing we're doing with the minimum digital living standard, is working out what people have described as their need is in terms of actual bandwidth, not advertised bandwidth, but actual bandwidth. So is that actual bandwidth or advertised average bandwidth?
It is actual bandwidth. Yep.
Oh, okay. That's my questions. Thanks, John.
Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Sam. John Duncan.
Thanks, John. Quick question, Alex. Well, it's 2 questions. How did you select the 10% with the Bolton at Home, and was there any sort of feedback from the other 900 people saying, "Oh, why didn't we get the opportunity to get the voucher?"
Yeah, it's a good question. So originally I went to the sort of our senior sort of executive team and said, look, really like to do something a little bit extra. Like I said before, they started off with 10% of units was just given, and we were keen to understand the level of take up. The belief from our team was that we wouldn't get anywhere near the 10%, purely because of the information and feedback that we've had previously with the social tariff being so low as well. In terms of selection, we didn't want to put any barriers up. So with our social tariff, there has to be the resident has to be on means tested benefits. What we want to do is remove all barriers and just understand with the pilot, giving us sort of flexibility with how we select people, is giving them to Bolton at Home completely at their discretion. So to all the sites that were installed, we offered the vouchers to, so everyone got a fair chance of getting it. However, it is on a first come first basis. So there is obviously still, as Simeon did the math before, there's still vouchers to come and be allocated and be taken up by the residents. So ourselves and Bolton Home are looking to see if we can do any more engagement with that. And I think Sean is going to touch on that in a couple of slides later. But I also think as well, and I've alluded to this with Sean, is that from a hyperoptic point of view, we're keen to maybe even take this beyond 10% and understand how far this can go. And I think that will really help as well drive the research that Simeon's doing.
Right. Thank you very much, Alex. Tanya, did you want to come in?
I was going to ask exactly the same question as John Duncan, so I don't need to. Thank you.
Okay,
excellent. Thanks. I'll move on to the next slide. I think we've only got two or three slides to go, John. So Sean, I'll hand over to you.
So as Alex referred to, we got a lot of feedback through the voices and through the roundtable that the hyperoptic did with our tenants, and because of those that we wanted to look at some of the recommendations or some of the key areas that the tenants thought we should be looking at. So going forward, further actions that we are going to be taking around this, we are looking at skills for the elderly, around digital inclusion. We're looking at where we have sheltered properties, community centres, UCAN centres, and putting on sessions there for them. We'll probably also look at the areas where we've installed fibre optic, and maybe look at where we've got communal areas there to actually put on digital type the activities there as well. We've engaged with Bolton Library, and we've already done device loan schemes, but we're actually going to be looking at them. I think the fact that sometimes, yeah, they are older machines, they are on the cheaper end of the market as well, does have an impact. So we are going to be looking at that with Bolton Libraries. We have taken up the data banks already, and we'll continue to do that. We're going to look at now how we introduce IT into non-IT activities. Like if we're having community events, then why aren't we getting the local people to design the community posters? If we're doing ESOL, why aren't we looking at how we do ESOL and do that in a different way, so that we're not actively saying, oh, come and learn how to have digital skills. We're saying, come and let's do this together, but to do this, you're going to have to learn how to do this. So looking at it slightly differently. We already have free use of computers for a UCAN service, for general public from our UCAN services, and we'll continue on with that. We are doing a survey around digital inclusions that will inform our new and updated strategy, and we probably will also do some follow-up work with the people in the properties that have got access to hyper optics to look at any issues that they might have, or any questions they might have whilst they've got that in their properties. And we're also right now exploring getting a Wi-Fi into our community centres with hyper optic, which wasn't part of this deal or pilot at all, but we thought we'd ask the question anyway, so they're looking at that for us. And we want to maximise the use of the vouchers to make sure that where the vouchers haven't been taken up, or where maybe hyper optic will extend that we ensure that our customers get full use of that, and they're not concerned about it being too good to be true type thing. Also, I think everybody's developed a digital champion scheme at one time or another, and we're doing this with Bolton CVS, Bolton Council, the libraries, and looking at how we actually do that. And we'd like that to current community events and groups and everything else. I suppose for me, having this project has actually has helped us as a housing organisation to focus where we can look at digital skills and access to digital and digital exclusion, and amongst all the other stuff that we actually do, so that it's like a key thread that runs through everything that we do. So yeah, prioritise and promote affordable scheme and all hyper optic messaging and branding. I think it's quite important that we look at this as an ongoing partnership, and it just doesn't finish at the end of March, that it's something that we catch up with quite frequently and look at how the pilot, what has developed from the pilot, if you like. And we will be doing a joint marketing approach, and we will be looking at having local events across the borough. And that's it.
Thank you very much.
From me.
That's fantastic. Thank you very much for that presentation. The previous presentation we had, Wythenshawe working with Virgin Media, and it's great to get the work that you're doing in Bolton. It's kind of interesting where there's kind of contrasts and similarities, I think, in some of those areas. So does anybody have any questions that they would like to ask Shauna or Alex moving forward? I've just got one whilst you perhaps think about that. When we set out on the development of these pilots, what we wanted to do is make sure that whatever was developed was sustainable. We wanted to determine how far we could go working with them between the market, with social housing providers and local authorities in delivering a kind of sustainable and affordable offer. What's your view, Alex, around the £5 per month thing? Because you obviously have to make the business work.
Yeah, for sure. It's from our perspective, I think because of the low take-up of the social tariff that we had, we were really struggling to understand as a company what else can we do? We've removed all the barriers we thought were there, and bringing the cost down is obviously something that we already had done. You know, saving, I think it is £7 on the 50 meg product and £10 on 150 meg. In terms of £5 itself, and the sort of contract term of that is that it is a little bit different because the resin is sort of built into sort of 12 months at £5. What we wanted to understand is actually if they give them a taste of what the product is, and if it's a good product and if it's at a good price, then after that 12 months, you'd like to see the sort of return in sort of the customer coming back to the base as well. So it's sort of a commitment from us is to say, like, okay, well, we'll put a product out there, we'll make it good, we'll make it affordable, then we'll see what the return is of the customer base there on after, because we'd hoped that the resident would see the value of the product, and also see the value that it goes from £5 to £15 after 12 months, is actually to see, okay, do they value this product enough in their life for them to add an extra £10 to that. So it's something that obviously is ongoing very much at the moment, and it's feeding into the market analysis that's ongoing for sure. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. Sim.
Just potentially to slightly challenge your research question there, because I think there's a difference between somebody valuing this in their life at £5 and they can see the absolute value of it, right? But if their disposable income at the end of the month is £30, shifting it up to 12, no matter how much they value it, right, it's not necessarily going to work, or they're going to make a different decision. You know, I mean, the classic example, you know, that I first picked up on this kind of debate was, you know, when the extra bedroom charge tax came in and benefits. Because where I was doing fieldwork in Sheffield, the problem was a lot of the social housing was structured such that, say, people with X number of kids would have as far as the government's concerned, an extra room. So they were faced with 40 quid a month fine, you know, essentially on their benefits because they were living in a too large a house, yeah, or moving to another area. So given the cost of the internet, there was a choice of stay where I am, turn the internet off. My child doesn't have to move school. I don't have to move house. Lots of disruption is prevented, right? But I've turned the internet off. And part of the reason for staying is because it's a good school, but now you've turned the internet off, the kid's not got the digital access to school, right? And I think those real kind of complex, very careful decisions that people make, they're not irrational decisions. They're really thoughtful decisions. I mean, if you want a good economist in charge of the government's finances, get some people on low incomes. You know, they know how to make money stretch out. I mean, that sounds really horrendously whatever, but it's a truth that the actual reality is that people work really hard to make their money do everything they can. And that comes out in all the interviews we've had. And so I think you need to phrase that as not whether you can look at how much they value it, but what's their material circumstance and can they make that decision? Because if you don't ask that question, you'll make the assumption that they don't value it enough when they may actually value it enough. They just can't afford it enough.
I think it's exactly right, and I think what we're trying to do is from the back of this, and a sort of a byproduct of this is to show and educate actually central government and elsewhere that there is you know, if you reduce the product to this amount, okay, there is a high take up of this. You know, we are a business at the end of the day. We're investing heavily, hundreds of thousands into Bolton at Home with the full fire product that we do. We have got to balance the books. So I think it is, I totally agree. The wording might have been a bit off there, but I think the byproduct of it is to educate central government as well, and to understand actually if you do drop the product down from, you know, even reduce it further, there is a high take up of that.
I think the other question is there other stakeholders? And whether it is social housing, which is strapped for cash, or local government or national government, they can make up that gap because of the benefits to them of people actually filling in their benefits forms, people actually going to the doctor, people whatever, you know, and so on. That mean for certain populations, it's worth keeping that subsidy in there longer term, not necessarily provided by you. So yeah.
That's a really good point, Sam, because the other thing from these pilots is to determine where intervention is actually needed. If there is, if you like, a market failure in that the providers can only go so far, it's, well, what is that gap and where do you target it? So that has been a great session. Really enjoyed this, and I think it feels like a lot of the kind of conclusions now from this work are beginning to come together and crystallize. We've got a next session. I can't remember whether the date is, but we're involving more of the internet service providers moving forward across the other pilots. And what we want to do is start to bring in the other findings from the work that's being carried out in other areas, and bring those to the table, because I think it's a discovery piece, and some areas may not follow the kind of have the kind of momentum, I suppose, of Bolton and Wythenshawe, but it's really important to capture the learning and finding from those. So that's the next session that we're going to be having in I think it's about 4 weeks' time, but we'll send through the details. I think the dates are already in the diary, so we'll send that through. So Bina, from your side, is there anything else from the kind of digital inclusion side that you want to mention at this stage?
No, other than just thanking everyone for coming. I know Sim's going to come in just now, but I think it just really helps, Alex, just kind of hearing from yourselves kind of what the art of the possible is, and just that openness to exploring that and trying to really crucially understand. And you've obviously got a huge evidence base around the work that you've done in other parts of the UK, and I think the point is here just seeing what works, you know, now for people, particularly around the cost of living crisis. Some of that sentiment that has come through that Sim refers to, I think it's just vital in terms of what is going to make the difference, and that particular approach. And I think your approach with Shauna has really kind of shown impact in ways that we know nationally the things like social tariffs don't necessarily have that uptake. So I think there's some interesting learnings here. Thank you everyone for joining. Sim, shall I hand over to you? Thank you.
Oh, I was just going to make a warning to, I don't know if there are many ISP, because I can't see everybody's names here, ISP colleagues on the call, but our next task is to come talk to you. So you'll probably be getting an email from myself or Belinda Tyrrell at Liverpool, seeing if we can get a meeting in the diary just to basically have a conversation about what's working, what's not working, things like, you know, that's just been presented, so we can document that for the overall kind of findings from the program. So watch your inbox. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sim, and thank you all very much for joining the session, and lots of chat going on at the same time. So I think it's just been a really interactive session, and thank you very much for joining, and see you at the next one in around 4 weeks' time. So thanks again.